everyone, welcome to Your Learn Lab. I'm Seema, and if you're an IGNOU student, you're in the right place. Here we create videos on different IGNOU courses to help you ace your exams, so hit subscribe and join me on this learning journey. Welcome to MEG-01 IGNOU British Poetry Series, Block 1. Today, we are going to explore the literary background of Chaucer's world, and here's how our session is structured. First, we'll look at the major phases of medieval English literature, how it began with religious and anonymous texts and gradually gave way to more secular and socially aware voices like Chaucer, Langland, and Gower. Then we'll turn to language and society, examining how English evolved after the Norman Conquest and how shifting power structures influenced literary form and audience. After that, we'll explore the key literary movements and innovations of the time, like the alliterative revival, the rise of courtly literature, and the growing emphasis on individual voice. And finally, we will reflect on the legacy of this period, especially the emergence of Chaucer as a powerful English voice who helped shape literary identity for generations to come. The structure isn't just chronological, it reflects how literature both responds to and helps shape the world around it. And that's a key idea to carry into your MEG-1 exam preparation. Let's first dive into the literary evolution of the English Middle Ages, an era of profound transformation. From the Norman Conquest in 1066 to the rise of Chaucer at the end of the 14th century, this period saw seismic shifts in language, literature, and society. We'll examine how these shifts were reflected in the literature of the time and how the foundations of English literary identity began to take shape. Now, the story begins in 1066 with the Battle of Hastings and William the Conqueror claiming the English throne. This wasn't just a change in rulers, it marked the start of a new era. French-speaking nobles replaced Anglo-Saxon elites, and with them came a new culture, new legal systems, and new literary influences. This movement, 1066, is widely considered the beginning of the English Middle Ages. The period stretches all the way to early 1500s, ending around 1533 with the beginning of the English Reformation. That's when Henry VIII famously broke from the Catholic Church, and England's religious identity began to shift dramatically. So, we are looking at nearly 500 years of transformation, socially, linguistically, and spiritually. During this time, the structure of feudal society evolved. The church reached the height of its influence, but also faced growing criticism. Literature responded to all of this, first with devotional texts, later with more socially aware and imaginative works. It's this arc of transformation from conquest to reformation that we are following today. Now that we've anchored ourselves in the historical context, let's look at how this evolving world translated into distinct phases of English literary output. Think of medieval English literature as unfolding in three major phases. The first, up to around 1250, is largely religious. Imagine the scribes in monasteries, diligently copying Latin homilies, saints' lives, and moral tale. These texts were meant to instruct and inspire spiritual devotion. Then around 1250, something changes. English society becomes more settled, trade and towns begin to grow, and with that comes a new audience. Nobles and courtly readers, hungry for romance and entertainment. The second phase gives us stories of knights, quests, and idealized love, many of them adapted from French sources. After 1350, we enter the golden age of Middle English literature. This is when we meet Chaucer, William Langland, John Gower, and the mysterious Pearl poet. These writers not only craft distinct voices but also use English in increasingly sophisticated ways, blending social commentary, allegory, and poetic skill to create enduring works. To fully appreciate these literary phases, we need to understand the changing role of language itself, how English nearly vanished and then came roaring back. Let's take a closer look at what happened to English language after the Norman Conquest. After William's conquest, French became the language of the ruling elite. It was spoken at court, in law, and in aristocratic households. Meanwhile, Latin remained the language of the church and scholarship used in universities and monasteries. But Old English didn't disappear. It stayed alive among the common people, passed on through ballads, riddles, and oral storytelling. This created a trilingual society: French for the nobles, Latin for the clerics, and English for the people. Each language served a purpose and carried its own prestige. Early Middle English, which began emerging in this period, was deeply oral in nature. It was rhythmic and communal, designed to be heard, not just read. Literature in this form helped preserve the English identity even as foreign influences flooded the island. But English didn't just survive, it eventually thrived. Let's move to the next key movement: the political changes that helped English reclaim its space at the center of cultural and literary life. So here's a turning point. In 1204, England lost control of Normandy. That political loss had huge cultural consequences. Without land in France, the English nobility began to identify more with England itself. And English, once dismissed as the language of peasants, started to return to prominence. By the mid-13th century, English was being spoken more confidently in elite circles. Over time, it absorbed thousands of French words, terms related to government, law, fashion, and cuisine. This enriched the vocabulary and gave rise to what we call Middle English. By the 1300s, English wasn't just spoken, it was being written with increasing sophistication. It became the language of administration, poetry, and even education. Chaucer's genius in part was to show just how expressive and refined English had become. His work marks English's full comeback not just as a spoken tongue but as a literary force. With English firmly back in the literary spotlight, let's now explore how writers used it, what styles, audiences, and themes emerged as literature became more communal, performative, and stylistically diverse. Now let's take a look at how literature actually looked like in practice. Imagine hearing a story in a medieval hall, not reading silently, but listening as a bard or cleric recites verses aloud. That's the nature of most medieval literature. It was communal, not private. It was also deeply impersonal. You won't find authors signing their names or inserting themselves into the text. Instead, they leaned on authority, religious doctrine, classical sources, or well-established moral traditions. Most texts were anonymous, passed from one voice to another. Originality wasn't the goal. Moral instruction and shared cultural values were. Over time, as more women joined the audience in noble households, literature shifted from the heroic and martial to the courtly and emotional. Even secular stories were often framed by Christian ideals. But by the 14th century, something exciting happened. Writers began to experiment with language, with structure, and with a return to older English forms. Let's look at those poetic innovations next. We now enter one of the most vibrant periods in medieval English literature. The 14th century saw a surge of experimentation. One key movement was the alliterative revival, a return to old poetic forms of Beowulf with 4-beat lines linked by alliteration. This revival was strongest in the North and West Midlands. Writers there weren't trying to mimic French style. They were reclaiming something English. Among the greatest results are 4 stunning poems: Pearl, Patience, Purity, and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. All are found in a single manuscript, and scholars believe they may have been written by the same hand. Pearl is a mystical dream vision about a father mourning his lost daughter. Patience retells the story of Jonah. Purity explores divine judgment. And Sir Gawain, perhaps the finest of all, is a richly layered Arthurian tale about honor, temptation, and humility. These texts blend allegory, spiritual depth, and poetic brilliance. While these poets were innovating in the North, in London, another writer was about to redefine English literature entirely. Let's meet Chaucer and those who wrote alongside and after him. Chaucer didn't rise in isolation. He was part of a literary network, a group of writers who were shaping what English literature could be. John Gower was one of his close contemporaries and wrote in not one but three languages, French, Latin, and English. His Confessio Amantis offers a collection of moral tales framed as an advice about love, a kind of serious didactic cousin to Chaucer's work. After Chaucer, several poets tried to follow him in his footsteps. Hoccleve and Lydgate borrowed heavily from his style but often lacked his sharpness or originality. It's in Scotland, interestingly, where Chaucer's influence blossomed in the most imaginative ways. James Warne's Kinge's Cuhere reflects on imprisonment and love. Robert Henryson's Testament of Cressida is a haunting continuation of Troilus and Cressida, giving Cressida a tragic fate. William Dunbar's Trois Married Women and the Widow is bold and satirical, and Gavin Douglas's Palace of Honor channels Chaucer's dream visions. These writers didn't just imitate, they expanded his legacy. But what made Chaucer so special? Why do we call him the father of English poetry? Let's take a closer look at his unique contribution. Geoffrey Chaucer holds a unique place in literary history because he didn't just write in English, he changed it. He gave it shape, status, and sophistication. In the Canterbury Tales, Chaucer brings together a cross-section of medieval society. A knight, a miller, a prioress, a pardoner, and more. Each speaks in a distinct voice, revealing their personalities, prejudices, and contradictions. It's one of the earliest examples of character realism in English literature. Chaucer combined influences from French courtly poetry, Italian narrative tradition like Boccaccio, and classical learning. But what made his work groundbreaking was his choice to write in Middle English, using iambic pentameter and rhymed couplets, to prove that English could be poetic, ironic, intellectual, and emotionally rich. Now, let's zoom in on something Chaucer did particularly well, blending high and low styles. From courtly ideals to coarse humor, he made literature speak to everyone. Let's explore that stylistic range next. So Chaucer's storytelling was really flexible. In the Canterbury Tales, he doesn't stick to one kind of literature, he gives us everything from lofty romance to bawdy farce. On one side, we have the courtly romance tradition, stories filled with knights, noble ladies, elaborate allegories, and spiritualized love. These tales are elegant, refined, and idealistic, often set in far-off lands and told in polished language. Then comes in the fabuleux, a completely different genre. Here we meet greedy millers, cheating wives, and bumbling clerks. These stories are short, sharp, and full of earthy humor. They poke fun at social norms and often give power to the cunning underdog. Chaucer's genius was in weaving both into the same narrative space. He gave each character a tale suited to their social role and personality, showing that literature could be inclusive, layered, and critically observant of medieval life. So as we close, let's consider the broader impact of all of this. What legacy did medieval literature leave behind, and how did it shape the future of English writing? The literature of the medieval ages gave us much more than tales of knights and pilgrims. It established a tradition. It proved that English could carry weight, wit, and wisdom. That it could be a vehicle for storytelling as complex and beautiful as anything in Latin or French. Writers like Chaucer didn't just entertain. They modeled how literature could reflect society, ask the hard questions, and give voice to a range of human experiences. They laid the groundwork for Renaissance writers like Spencer and Shakespeare, who would build on the forms, themes, and languages shaped in this earlier era. And perhaps most importantly, they helped turn English into a language of art. Through their work, English literature was no longer seen as a provincial or rustic language. It became something that could reach across class boundaries and even national borders. So, as we reach the end of this session, we've seen how English literature in the medieval period was shaped by history, language shifts, and cultural change. We moved from a time of anonymous religious verse to one of vibrant, multifaceted storytelling in a newly empowered English tongue. Writers like Chaucer captured the voices in their world with humor, irony, and insight, laying the groundwork for what English literature could become. Their works may be centuries old, but they continue to speak to challenge, to amuse, and move us. This background is especially important when studying Chaucer for your MEG-01 exam. Whether you're asked about his style, themes, or historical relevance, remember Chaucer's work reflects the intellectual, linguistic, and literary transformations of his time. You can draw on what we've covered today to explain why he blended genres, used Middle English, or represented a range of social voices in the Canterbury Tales. Your answers will be stronger when you connect Chaucer's art to the world that shaped it. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the literary Middle Ages. And that brings us to the end of this video. And I wish you all the best for your MEG-01 exam. Do add your comments to let me know how you found this video, and if you did find it helpful and would like to learn more, be sure to like, share and subscribe to Your Learn Lab. See you in the next one. Until then, happy learning.